Hello, and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie Ostwalt. When we think of the philosophical concept of the good life, inevitably we must consider ethical and moral questions concerning the beginnings of life and the end of life. My guest today, Dr. John Hardwig, is a bioethicist who has spent much of his professional life asking questions about good beginnings and good ends. And he'll help us negotiate some very difficult concerns about the end of life. Welcome, Dr. Hardwig. John, if I may.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us today. I know you have a busy day on our campus, and it's nice of you to take time to meet us here.
Well, thank you for having me on the program.
Absolutely. You've written extensively about end-of-life issues. You were professor and chair at the University of Tennessee. You're a professor emeritus now and retired, but still very active. And one of the, I guess maybe it's fair to say that one of the most controversial things you've been writing about over a career is whether or not we actually have a duty to die at certain points in our life. And that's the topic of your talk tonight. That raises all kinds of moral and religious questions in my mind, right?
Yeah.
But you know, sort of immediately, whether or not we have that duty, when do we have that duty, who has that duty, how? And you just jump in with maybe articulate your position here, and we can go from there.
Yeah, maybe at the risk of starting too far back, I want to point out that we've invented a new kind of death in my lifetime, and that sounds like a dumb thing to say. Death is the same. Come on, but okay. But traditionally, death had three features. It was unexpected, unpredictable. It was normally sudden, and usually it came too early. I'm sorry, too early. Yeah. So it was a tragedy. People died unexpectedly, suddenly, and we did what we could to prolong their life, and our whole culture grew out of that kind of death. Now we've got deaths that, number one, are predictable. A famous geriatrician, Joanne Lynn, said that the average patient now knows 3 years in advance what they will die of.
Really?
Which is kind of amazing. You still don't know when you're going to die,
right.
But you know what it's going to be, and you know roughly how much time you've got left.
Okay.
So, and it's slow. The doctors will be treating you for those whole 3 years,
right?
Maybe more than that. The average American male is debilitated for 5 years before he dies. The average female debilitated for 8 years before she dies. So those are huge numbers, 3, 5, and 8, okay? And that's what I mean by a new death. And that raises all kinds of new ethical and religious issues. In our context, death often comes too late. And what I mean by that is almost everyone who's watching this program can relate to that. They will know a relative in their family or in a close friend's family, someone who lingered on far too long.
Well, in fact, oftentimes we use I guess it's kind of a crass phrase, but we might comment that so-and-so might be better off if they weren't here, if they were dead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So, and often we give ourselves horrible deaths. Let me adapt an old joke. So this guy was dying, and it was horrible, painful. And the doctors kept asking, do you want us to, if your heart stops, do you want us to just let you die? No. God will take me when it's my time. Do you want this kind of treatment? No. Yes, absolutely. God will take me when it's my time. Okay, so his heart stopped 2 times, 3 times. They kept restarting his heart. Okay, his kidneys shut down, so they put him on dialysis. And finally, he couldn't digest food anymore, so they gave him nutrition through a vein. But finally, he died. And he got through the pearly gates, and he said, "God, that was awful. That was terrible. Why did you put me through it?" And God says, "I stopped your heart, not once, but 3 times. I shut down your kidneys, and I finally made it so you couldn't even digest food. What did you want me to do?" Okay, go ahead.
Well, so really the underlying truth to that joke is that medical technology, and I guess this is what has brought on the new death, right? Medical technology has
Absolutely.
moved us to a place where we're making so much progress on acute illnesses, things that would have killed us, and now we're facing more chronic illness, dementia, disability in old age.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a different kind of quality of life, I guess, at the end of life.
Yeah. So if it makes sense to say someone died too late, it can be for either of 2 reasons. Either because it was horrible for the patient, that's the joke.
Right.
Or that it was horrible for the close friends and family of the patient. Okay. The first one is what I call the art of dying. And it's on us now to strategize about how and when we're going to die. Okay, do you really want to live as long as the docs can keep your lungs functioning and your heart functioning? Regardless of what's going on upstairs, regardless of how much it hurts, okay? Or do you want to start saying no at some point? No, I've had a life, I'm done.
How far do you take this art of dying concept? Is it just a passive thing, or is there also an element here that one could be proactive at the end of life to say, I'm done, do something to end this? Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. In this state, and also in my state, it's illegal for doctors to do anything to actively end your life. Active euthanasia is illegal. Now, what happens if you've got a doctor who trusts you and you trust, the doctor will say, you go to the doctor and you say, I can't sleep, doc. I just lie awake all night. I'm in horrible pain and I worry and I can't sleep. The doc says, okay, here's some sleeping pills. Here's the therapeutic dose. But don't take more than that because they could kill you. And you say, oh, don't worry about that, doc. I would never do that. And then you go home and you got your dose. Okay, so yeah, I think that's a strategy.
That shifts a moral burden, though, I guess, or from, I guess, a professional euthanasiast, if that's a word, to self-determination.
Yes.
Does that raise any kind of moral issues? I mean, I guess in terms of religion, it would definitely.
Yes.
So I'm sure that your work makes no friends with the Catholic Church or Protestant evangelicals.
That's right.
Both would view suicide, either assisted or self-determined, as sinful.
Yes,
I suppose, right?
Yes, officially that's true, but there are many Catholics and there are many Protestants who don't hold with the official position. My aunt was 90 years old, bedridden, blind, but she had no terminal illness at all, and that for her was horrible because that meant there's no end in sight. There's no end in sight. If I make it through the next 6 months, there's still no end in sight. So finally she decided it was time for her to die, and she said, okay, I'm not going to eat or drink anymore. And her family all gathered around and said, oh, you can't do that. You can't do that. We love you. And she said, I love you too, but it's time for me to go. Goodbye.
So this was actually a family discussion.
Yes. Yes.
I would say that's unusual. In most cases.
Yes. Yes. It was a family discussion, but it was pretty one-sided.
Right.
Because she was going to do it. And the nursing home supported her. And my mother, and she died of dehydration, starvation, okay? Which hospice nurses say is a really good way to die.
Because they provide palliative care, I
Right,
guess, while
right.
this is going on.
Right. And the nursing home did that too.
Right.
My mother, who was a devout Christian, kept asking me, John, was that suicide? Did she commit suicide? And I tried to comfort her, and I said, no, she didn't commit suicide. That's not suicide.
Right.
But I think there's a philosophical and a moral and a religious question about whether that is suicide.
Right. Right.
But we don't want to say anymore that anytime you refuse life-prolonging treatment, that's a kind of suicide.
Right.
Okay, if the doctor says, we can give you this horrible chemo and you got a 70% chance of living another 5 years if you undergo that, or we can just make you as comfortable as possible and then you'll probably die in a year. And you say, okay, make me comfortable, doc.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't think of that as suicide. But yeah. So the spiritual issues that come with a death that comes too late, I would count this a spiritual issue, meaninglessness.
Right.
My mother sat for years and years by the side of her nursing home bed, and she said to me over and over again, John, why does this have to take so long? Why does this have to take so long? I'm ready. Right. I've been ready for years. And she could not find anything to occupy her time. So she just sat there being deathly bored. I mean, how much daytime TV can you watch?
So we often talk about quality of life, but you're talking actually about something more profound, that is meaningful life.
Yeah.
So there comes a point, I suppose, in one's life when they're not finding meaning anymore, and that's when the death comes too late, right? They may be otherwise healthy or at least not critical.
Yeah, I would put that forward as a candidate for one definition of death too late from a spiritual point of view, from a religious point of view.
So I think the more challenging moral and ethical question for me, however, is maybe your second point that I'm not sure we got to, but there's also a point you write that one might have a duty to die when they can no longer care for themselves, and when their care by those who love them present insurmountable problems for those who are providing the care. And that's a different situation than self-determination, I think.
Yes, and that's more problematic and that's more worrisome.
Right.
Because the person who has a duty to die may not want to die. I would say, who can have a duty to die? Only people who are adults, who understand what's going on, who are in full possession of their powers. Okay, so a demented patient cannot have a duty to die. A demented patient doesn't understand enough about what's going on to do that. Okay, so why do I think there's a duty to die? Well, first one, this sounds really crass. That's okay, I'm a crass guy. Financial. A third of the bankruptcies in the United States each year are due to medical expenses, okay? But I think more profound than that is caregiving. If I were to become debilitated and my wife had to care for me 24/7, or chose to try to care for me 24/7, we now know what happens to those partners. And here's what happens. First of all, they neglect their own health. They can't go to the doctor because I'm on call 24/7.
Right.
Their health declines. They get depressed. Friendships and valued activities fall by the wayside. You can't ever go out to lunch with anybody because you're always on call. You get exhausted, and the most profound, most disturbing study I read says, tried to match partners, okay? The caregiver partner and a non-caregiver partner. And they tried to match them in terms of their health, their age, their economic background, all that kind of stuff, okay? Is there any difference in the health outcomes? And the one who was the caregiver had a 50% chance, better chance of being dead in 5 years than the other one. So what I'm doing, what I might be doing, is shortening my wife's life to extend mine. Yeah.
And that creates the more kind of stickier, I guess,
Yeah.
the stickier moral questions.
Yes. That creates, in my mind, the duty to die.
Right. And then you also write, though, and I thought this was profound, that you say that we avoid that because of, I think you called it the individualistic fallacy.
Yeah.
The idea that we have that our own life is the only one that matters, that we're not connected in these very complicated ways.
Yep.
So we have to overcome that in order to
Yes.
think about the effects of prolonged living, I guess, that that effect would have on other people.
Yeah, on close friends and family especially. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so one of the, I want to go back to your joke, because one of the religious objections, the main religious objection perhaps, is that God is the author of life, and therefore God should control the timing of his creature's death. And your story sort of undercuts that notion somewhat, doesn't it?
So when does God want me to die?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is it at the precise moment that we've used all of our medical tricks available and it still doesn't work? Is that when God wants me to die? Or is it possible for me to extend my life longer than God wants it to be there? So you can maybe violate God's will for your death in two ways. You can die too soon. You can take your life before God wants it ended, or perhaps you can extend it longer than God wanted it to be.
And we don't normally think that way. We normally think about ending it too soon, right? So it's not common for us to think about extending life would be against God's will as well. But that would be one of the challenges, I guess, to the religious objection.
Right. And that's one of the things I think we need to think about, because most Americans don't want every last trick that the medicals have in their pack.
Well, the other thing that you wrote that I thought was interesting from a perspective of religion scholar is, and it's really self-obvious, that religion does a pretty good job helping us imagine an afterlife, but most religion or ritual doesn't do a very good job helping us with death itself, or at least not with helping us find meaning in the process of dying and death. Can religion do that, or is it out of religion's purview? Or what would you say to clergy and religious leaders who want to help dying parishioners find meaning in death, not just in the hope of an afterlife?
Okay. Well, here's a start from Ira Byock, who was a hospice doc in Montana for a long time. And in his experience, he says, patients die well if they can say 5 things. Whoa, it's not what kind of treatment you get, it's what you can say. And the 5 things are so powerful to me that I can hardly say them without choking up, but here they go. I forgive you, please forgive me, thank you, I love you, goodbye. And those are so powerful.
It really is.
And I think those are spiritual words.
Right.
My wife said about her father, she harbored a lot of resentments about her upbringing. She said, it's going to take me a pretty long time to be able to say those 5 things to him.
Yeah.
Well, he died, so she doesn't have to say them. But this is affirming your connection with those you've always been close to, and it's then at the end of that, this is over. Who's the poet that said, in loving we need to learn only to let go, holding comes natural, which I think is right. So could we develop religious rituals, or could chaplains or pastors learn how to give parishioners permission to die,
Right.
and help them to do it in a way that's, I don't know, rewarding, meaningful, that affirms their connections. Okay, so it feels as good as it can feel, feels right when it's time. Now, here's the downside, though. In order for anyone to get a death like that, you have to die before you become totally incapacitated. Okay, if you're seriously demented, you can't do any of those. Right. You don't even recognize your partner, maybe. If you're in an ICU and hooked up to tubes and in some kind of twilight, you can't do any of those.
Sure.
So you're going to have to go through the rituals, the religious rituals for dying earlier, while you're still with it.
Right.
Still know what's going on. And that's the way it used to work back in the Middle Ages. First of all, people thought you were a perfect fool if you didn't know you were dying. Come on, how dumb can a guy be if he doesn't? Okay, now your doctors can't even tell you that.
Sure.
But there was a ritual. They gathered the family around, and the dying man said, "Okay, he's going to have the farm, and he can have the okay." Yeah. And then they said goodbye. And
well, this is difficult, though, right? I mean,
oh yeah.
And it sounds like that as we, and this is again a product of technology, as we have become better at prolonging life, we've become worse at facing death. And I think your work is profoundly important along these lines. And I congratulate you for having the courage to write some of the things you write. And I think it's eminently helpful. I feel like we've just scratched the surface. Yeah, I guess you'll have to come back for another time. But I do thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
That was tremendously interesting, and can't wait to hear your talk tonight.
Okay.
All right. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on Religion and Life here at App TV. Thank you, Dr. John Hardwig. John, for taking time out of your busy schedule. Join us next week when we have another exploration of life events that occur at the intersection of religion, society, and culture. Our guest then will be Dr. Lee McCorkle. Until then, this is Ozzie Ostwalt.